Right now, as you're watching this, your spine is slowly crushing itself under the weight of your own skull. Your brain is lying to you about what you just saw 3 seconds ago. Your immune system is probably attacking something completely harmless, like dust or peanut butter. And your jaw? Your jaw is literally too small for the teeth sitting inside it. And none of this is a glitch. None of this is bad luck. None of this is because you're unhealthy or doing something wrong. This is by design. Well, sort of. Here's something that nobody really sits down and thinks about. We walk around every single day in these bodies, right? We wake up, we stretch, maybe our back hurts, maybe our knee clicks, maybe we didn't sleep well even though we were in bed for 9 hours. And we just shrug it off. We say, that's normal. We say, I'm getting older. We say, everyone deals with this. But what if I told you that the reason all of this happens, the back pain, the anxiety, the terrible sleep, the allergies, the cavities, the knee problems, the brain fog, what if I told you that every single one of these things traces back to the same root cause? And that root cause is this. Your body was never built for the life you're living. Not even close. See, we like to think of the human body as this incredible machine. And in some ways, yeah, it is. You're breathing right now without thinking about it. Your heart has been beating since before you were born. Your immune system is fighting off invaders you'll never even know existed. That's genuinely remarkable. But here's the thing. We don't talk about enough. The human body is not an engineering masterpiece. It's a compromise. A series of compromises, actually. Thousands of them. Stacked on top of each other over millions and millions of years. Each one solving a short-term problem while creating a long-term mess. Your body wasn't designed by some genius architect who sat down with a blueprint and planned everything out. No. Your body was cobbled together, piece by piece, era by era, crisis by crisis. Whatever worked good enough to keep you alive long enough to have kids, that's what stuck. Everything else? Evolution didn't care. Evolution doesn't care about your comfort. It doesn't care about your happiness. It doesn't care if your back hurts at age 35, or if your wisdom teeth are impacted, or if you can't fall asleep before 2 in the morning. Evolution only cares about one thing. Did you survive long enough to reproduce? That's it. That's the whole game. And because that's the only metric that ever mattered, you ended up with a body that is spectacularly good at not dying in the African savanna 70,000 years ago. But that same body, living in 2024, sitting in an office chair, staring at a glowing rectangle, eating processed food, breathing recycled air, it's a disaster. And I don't mean that in some dramatic clickbait way. I mean it structurally, biologically, neurologically. Your body is running ancient software in a modern world. And the bugs aren't small. The bugs are everything. Over the next little while, I'm going to walk you through your entire body, system by system, organ by organ. And I'm going to show you exactly where the compromises are, where the mismatches are, where evolution took a shortcut that made perfect sense 200,000 years ago, but is absolutely wrecking you today. We're going to talk about why your brain makes you anxious for no reason, why your spine is basically a structural failure, why your teeth don't fit in your mouth, why sleep is broken for almost everyone in the modern world, why your immune system attacks things that aren't even threats, why your eyes are falling apart, why your feet hurt, why your metabolism fights you every time you try to lose weight. All of it connects. All of it tells the same story. And that story is this. You are not living in the world your body was built for. And your body has no idea what to do about it. So, if you've ever wondered why everything feels just a little bit harder than it should, why your body seems to fight you at every turn, why being healthy feels like a full-time job, even though every other animal on the planet manages it without a gym membership or a meal plan. This is why. Let's start where it matters most. Let's start with the 3-pound universe sitting between your ears. Your brain. Your brain is the most complex object in the known universe. That's not an exaggeration. That's not motivational poster fluff. Neuroscientists, physicists, biologists, they all agree on this. Nothing we have ever discovered anywhere in the observable universe comes close to the complexity of the human brain. Roughly 86 billion neurons, each one connected to thousands of others. Trillions of connections firing every second, processing sensory input, memories, emotions, language, spatial awareness, abstract thought, creativity, all simultaneously. All without you even noticing most of it. So you'd think, with something this powerful, this sophisticated, this unbelievably intricate, you'd think it would work well, right? It doesn't. Or rather, it works exactly as intended. The problem is that what it was intended for and what you're using it for are two completely different things. Let's start with anxiety. Because anxiety is probably the most universal experience of modern human life. Almost everyone knows what it feels like. That tightness in your chest. That feeling like something bad is about to happen, but you can't identify what. That low-level hum of dread that follows you through your day. Millions of people take medication for it. Millions more suffer through it without treatment. And we talk about anxiety like it's a disorder, like it's something going wrong. Like your brain is malfunctioning. But it's not malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do. See, anxiety is your brain's alarm system. It's ancient, way older than language, way older than rational thought, way older than civilization itself. This system evolved when the things that could kill you were immediate and physical. A predator in the grass, a rival tribe approaching, a snake near your foot, a storm rolling in. In that world, anxiety was brilliant. It kept you alive. That jolt of cortisol, that spike in adrenaline, that hyper-awareness where suddenly everything feels sharp and dangerous. In the savanna, that response gave you maybe 2 extra seconds of reaction time. And those 2 seconds were the difference between being someone's ancestor and being someone's lunch. The problem is, that system never got an upgrade. It never learned the difference between a lion in the tall grass and an email from your boss. It never learned the difference between a rival tribe and a comment section on social media. It never figured out that the modern world is, statistically speaking, the safest environment any human has ever lived in. Your brain doesn't know that. Your brain still thinks it's dangerous out there, and so it fires the alarm over and over, all day long. For threats that aren't threats. For dangers that don't exist. For worst-case scenarios that will almost certainly never happen. And here's the really cruel part. Your brain is actually better at detecting threats than it is at recognizing safety. Psychologists call this the negativity bias. We evolved to prioritize negative information over positive information, because in the wild, missing a positive thing, like a fruit tree, just means you're a little hungry. Missing a negative thing, like a predator, means you're dead. So your brain is tuned, at the hardware level, to notice what's wrong, what's threatening, what could go bad. It's not a character flaw. It's not pessimism. It's survival programming that you can't turn off. And then there's dopamine. Oh, dopamine. Everyone talks about dopamine now. Social media is hijacking your dopamine. Your phone is a dopamine machine. Dopamine detox. You've heard all of this. But most people don't actually understand what dopamine does. They think it's the pleasure chemical. It's not. Not exactly. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It's not about enjoying the reward. It's about wanting the reward. It's the craving, the seeking, the just one more. Dopamine evolved to motivate you to do hard things that kept you alive. Finding food, exploring new territory, pursuing a mate, solving a problem. Dopamine was the carrot that got you moving when sitting still was easier. And the system worked beautifully when rewards were scarce and hard to get. You had to walk miles for food. You had to work for days to build a shelter. The dopamine hit was earned, and it was proportional to the effort. Now? Now you can get a dopamine hit every 6 seconds. Scroll, notification, like, new video, new message, next episode. Next level. Your phone is a dopamine slot machine that you carry in your pocket, and it delivers rewards faster than your brain was ever designed to process. So what happens? Your baseline shifts. Your brain recalibrates. The things that used to feel rewarding, a conversation, a walk, a meal, reading a book, they start feeling boring. Flat. Not enough. Because your brain has been trained to expect constant, effortless stimulation. This isn't addiction in the traditional sense. It's a mismatch. Your brain's reward system was built for a world of scarcity, and you've dropped it into a world of infinite abundance. And it's drowning. And we haven't even talked about memory yet. Here's something that should genuinely unsettle you. Your memories are not recordings. They're not video files stored somewhere in your brain that you play back when you want to remember something. That's what it feels like, but that's not what's happening. Every single time you remember something, your brain reconstructs it. From scratch. It pulls fragments from different areas. Emotional tone from the amygdala. Visual details from the visual cortex. Spatial information from the hippocampus. And it stitches them together into something that feels coherent. But here's the problem. Every time it stitches that memory together, it changes a little. Details shift. Emotions bleed in from your current state. Things get added that weren't there. Things get removed that were. Elizabeth Loftus, a psychologist at the University of California, Irvine, has spent decades studying this. Her research is wild. She's shown that you can implant entirely false memories in people, not vague feelings. Detailed, vivid, emotionally rich memories of events that never happened. And the people who hold those false memories are just as confident in them as they are in their real ones. Often more confident actually. In one of her famous studies, she convinced roughly 25% of participants that they had been lost in a shopping mall as a child. It never happened. But they remembered it. They remembered the fear. They remembered being found. Some of them even added details she never suggested. And this isn't some rare glitch in broken brains. This is how all brains work. Yours included. Right now, your most cherished memories, the ones that define who you think you are, many of them have been altered. Some of them might be partially or entirely fabricated. And you'll never know which ones. Why would evolution build a memory system this unreliable? Because reliability wasn't the point. Survival was the point. Your brain doesn't need to remember exactly what happened. It needs to remember what was dangerous, what was rewarding, and what to do next time. Accuracy is secondary to usefulness. If you ate a berry and got sick, your brain doesn't need to remember the exact color, size, and location of that berry. It just needs to flag berries like that equals bad. That's good enough. That keeps you alive. But in the modern world, we need accurate memories. For courtrooms, for relationships, for understanding our own past. And our brains just aren't built for that level of precision. Now let's talk about something else. Your brain does that seems helpful, but is actually kind of a mess. Decision making. You make roughly 35,000 decisions a day. What to wear, what to eat, whether to respond to that text now or later, whether to take the highway or the side streets. Most of these decisions are made unconsciously, without you ever being aware of them. And that's because your brain uses shortcuts. Psychologists call them heuristics, quick mental rules of thumb that let you make fast decisions without analyzing every piece of available information. Again, in the wild, this was genius. You didn't have time to carefully evaluate whether that shadow in the bushes was a predator or just wind. You needed to react instantly. So your brain developed snap judgment systems that traded accuracy for speed. But those same shortcuts, in the modern world, they create systematic errors, cognitive biases. There are hundreds of documented ones. Confirmation bias, where you only notice information that supports what you already believe. Anchoring bias, where the first number you hear influences every number after it. Availability bias, where you judge probability based on how easily you can think of examples, which is why people are more afraid of shark attacks than car accidents, even though cars are roughly 1,000 times more deadly. These biases aren't bugs. They're features. Features designed for a world that no longer exists. Your brain is a survival machine living in a thinking world. And the gap between those two things is the source of an enormous amount of modern human suffering. But your brain isn't the only part of you that's running outdated hardware. Let's move on to something you probably deal with every single day. Let's talk about your spine. If you've ever had back pain, and statistically speaking, most of you have or will, you probably blamed your posture, or your mattress, or the way you lifted that box, or getting older, or not exercising enough. And sure, those things can contribute. But the real reason your back hurts is way more fundamental than any of that. Your spine was never meant to be upright. Let me explain. The basic structural template for the vertebrate spine is about 500 million years old. It was originally designed for fish. A horizontal rod running along the length of the body, supported evenly along its entire length by the surrounding water. No compression, no load bearing, just a flexible axis for swimming. Over hundreds of millions of years, that basic design got modified. When our ancestors crawled out of the water and became tetrapods, four-legged land animals, the spine became a horizontal bridge. Think of it like a suspension bridge. Weight distributed relatively evenly across four support points. The spine hangs between the front legs and the back legs, and gravity pulls down more or less equally along the whole structure. This works pretty well. Dogs don't get back pain. Horses don't get herniated discs. Cats don't need chiropractors. But then something happened. Our lineage, the hominids, started standing up. And this is where everything went wrong. When you take a horizontal bridge and rotate it 90 degrees so it's vertical, you don't get a column. You get a mess. Because a bridge and a column are fundamentally different structures. They handle forces in completely different ways. A column needs to be straight and rigid, with weight stacked directly above the base. Think of a Greek pillar. Simple, strong, effective. But your spine isn't straight. It can't be. Because it's still that old bridge design, just rotated. So instead of a straight column, you have this S-shaped curve with multiple bends. The cervical curve in your neck. The thoracic curve in your upper back. The lumbar curve in your lower back. The sacral curve at the base. Those curves aren't elegant engineering. They're patches. Workarounds. Evolution's way of saying, we can't redesign the whole thing, so let's bend it until it sort of works. And it sort of works. Barely. The lumbar region, your lower back, bears the worst of it. Those 5 vertebrae at the bottom of your spine carry the weight of everything above them. Your entire torso, your arms, your head, which weighs about 11 pounds. 11 pounds doesn't sound like much, but imagine holding an 11-pound bowling ball at the end of a 2-foot stick. Now hold it there for 16 hours a day, for decades. That's what your lumbar spine is doing, every single day of your life. And the discs between your vertebrae, those gel-filled cushions that act as shock absorbers, they're under constant compressive load. They dehydrate throughout the day, which is why you're actually slightly shorter in the evening than you are in the morning. Over time, they wear down, they bulge, they herniate, they press on nerves. This is why back pain is the single leading cause of disability worldwide. Not cancer, not heart disease, back pain. The World Health Organization has data on this. Hundreds of millions of people across every culture, every age group, every income level, all dealing with back pain. And it's not because we're all sitting wrong or lifting wrong, it's because we're standing at all. Our spine was never redesigned for upright posture. It was jury-rigged. And the consequences show up in basically every adult human who has ever lived. But it gets worse. Because it's not just the spine. When we stood up, we changed the entire physics of our body. The pelvis had to reshape to support our organs from below instead of from the front. The knees had to lock in a new way. The feet had to become weight-bearing platforms instead of grasping tools. And every single one of those adaptations came with trade-offs. Let's talk about the knees for a second. Your knee is the largest joint in your body, and it's basically held together by 4 ligaments and some cartilage. That's it. There's no socket like in the hip. The knee is essentially 2 bones balanced on top of each other, held in place by soft tissue. In a quadruped, this isn't a huge problem because the knee doesn't bear the full weight of the body, and it doesn't need to lock in extension. But in a biped? Your knees handle enormous forces. When you walk, the force on your knee is about 1.5 times your body weight. When you run, it's up to 8 times your body weight. When you go downstairs, about 3 to 4 times. And the cartilage in your knee, the smooth tissue that lets the bones glide against each other without friction. It doesn't regenerate. Not meaningfully. Once it starts wearing down, it's gone. That's osteoarthritis. And it affects hundreds of millions of people globally. Again, this isn't because people are doing something wrong. It's because the human knee is a quadruped joint doing a biped's job. It was never redesigned for this. Let's keep going down. Let's talk about your feet. Because your feet tell one of the most fascinating stories of evolutionary compromise in the entire human body. Here's something you might not have considered. Your feet have 26 bones each. 26? That's a lot of bones for something that's just supposed to be a flat platform you stand on, right? Why would a simple weight-bearing surface need that many bones? Because your feet aren't simple weight-bearing surfaces. They're modified hands. Go look at a chimpanzee's foot sometime. It looks remarkably like a hand. Long, flexible toes, an opposable big toe that can grip branches. It's a grasping tool, designed for climbing and holding on. Your foot has the same basic skeletal structure, the same 26 bones, laid out in the same pattern. But over millions of years, as our ancestors came down from the trees and started walking upright on the ground, those bones got repurposed. The big toe moved in line with the other toes. It lost its opposability, but gained a push-off function for walking. The arch developed to absorb shock and store elastic energy during locomotion. The ankle joint stiffened to provide stability. But here's the thing. You still have 26 bones in there. And all those bones mean all those joints. And all those joints mean a lot of potential points of failure. Plantar fasciitis, bunions, flat feet, fallen arches, stress fractures, ankle sprains, heel spurs, Achilles tendonitis. The human foot is one of the most frequently injured parts of the body. And it's because it's an incredibly complex structure being asked to do something it wasn't originally built for. Think about it this way. If you were designing a foot from scratch for an upright biped, you would never use 26 bones. You'd use maybe 5 or 6 large, strong bones fused together into a solid, stable platform. Maybe a simple hinge at the ankle. Nothing fancy. Just strong, stable, efficient. But evolution can't design from scratch. It can only modify what's already there. So it took a grasping hand and slowly, gradually, turned it into a walking platform. And the result works. It works well enough. But it's not elegant. It's not optimal. It's a compromise. And we haven't even mentioned flat feet. About 20 to 30% of people have flat feet, meaning their arches have partially or fully collapsed. This was actually the ancestral condition. The arch is a relatively recent evolutionary addition. Some people's bodies just never fully developed it. Is it a disorder? Not really. It's just variation. Evolution didn't have a quality control department. Some people got strong arches, some didn't. Both survived long enough to reproduce, so both genetic patterns persisted. Now, let's go back up. Way up. To your mouth. Because what's happening in your mouth right now is one of the most visible, most universal, and most misunderstood evolutionary mismatches of all. Your teeth. If you have ever had a cavity, if you have ever needed braces, if you have ever had your wisdom teeth removed, you are living proof that the human mouth is an evolutionary train wreck. Let's start with the most obvious problem. Wisdom teeth. Third molars. The ones that show up in your late teens or early 20s, usually sideways, usually impacted, usually requiring surgical removal. About 85% of people will eventually need at least one wisdom tooth extracted. In some populations, it's even higher. This is one of the most common surgical procedures in the world. Why? Why would evolution give us teeth that don't fit in our mouths? The answer is that they used to fit. For most of human history, our jaws were bigger. Significantly bigger. Our ancestors ate tough, fibrous, uncooked food. Roots, tubers, raw meat, nuts, bark, hard fruits. This kind of food requires serious chewing, and serious chewing stimulates jaw growth during childhood and adolescence. When you chew hard food repeatedly throughout your developmental years, your jaw responds by growing larger and denser. It's a mechanical stimulus response. The bone adapts to the forces placed on it. And in a large jaw, 32 teeth fit just fine, including the wisdom teeth. They had plenty of room. But then something changed. Several somethings, actually. First, we started cooking food. Cooking softens food dramatically. It breaks down fibers and connective tissue before you even put it in your mouth. This means less chewing force needed, which means less mechanical stimulus for jaw growth. Then, more recently in evolutionary terms, we shifted to agriculture. Grain-based diets, processed food, soft bread, porridge, mashed everything. Each generation chewing less than the one before, and the jaw shrank. Generation by generation, the human jaw has been getting smaller, but the teeth didn't shrink to match. Because jaw size and tooth size are controlled by different genetic pathways. They don't scale together automatically. So now you've got 32 teeth trying to fit in a jaw that's only big enough for 28. Or sometimes fewer. The result: crowding, misalignment, impaction, malocclusion. This is why orthodontics is a multi-billion-dollar industry. This is why so many kids need braces. Not because something is genetically wrong with them, but because their jaws never got the mechanical stimulus they needed to grow to their full potential. Let's stay in the mouth for a bit longer, because there's more going on here than just wisdom teeth, cavities, dental caries, tooth decay. This is the single most common chronic disease in the entire world. Not diabetes, not heart disease, cavities. The World Health Organization estimates that nearly half of the global population, about 3.5 billion people, are affected by oral diseases, with untreated cavities in permanent teeth being the most common condition. And for most of human history, this wasn't really a thing. When researchers examine the skulls of ancient hunter-gatherers, they find remarkably low rates of tooth decay. These people had no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, no floss, no dentists, no fluoride in their water. And yet their teeth were, by and large, in excellent condition. How is that possible? Because cavities aren't caused by not brushing. Cavities are caused by bacteria in your mouth feeding on simple sugars and producing acid as a byproduct. That acid dissolves tooth enamel. That's the decay process. Ancient humans didn't eat much sugar. Their diet was meat, fibrous plants, nuts, seeds, and whatever else they could find. Very little of it was high in the simple carbohydrates that oral bacteria thrive on. But when agriculture arrived and humans started eating grain-based diets, the rates of dental decay skyrocketed. Archaeologists can literally see the transition in the fossil record. Pre-agricultural skulls have minimal decay. Post-agricultural skulls are full of cavities, abscesses, and tooth loss. And modern diets? Modern diets are an absolute feast for oral bacteria. Sugar is in everything. Refined carbohydrates are in everything. The bacteria in your mouth have never had it so good. So when you get a cavity, it's not because you're lazy about brushing. It's because you're eating a diet that your teeth were never designed to handle, in a jaw that's too small for them, in a mouth that evolved for a completely different world. Your dentist is essentially treating the consequences of an evolutionary mismatch. Every filling, every crown, every root canal is a patch for a problem that wouldn't exist if you were still eating what your ancestors ate. Now let's move on to something even more fundamental. Something you do every single night, but probably do very, very badly. Sleep. Here's a question. How much sleep do you need? 8 hours, right? Everyone knows that. 8 hours. It's been drilled into us since childhood. Get your 8 hours. Everything will be fine. But where did that number actually come from? The 8-hour sleep recommendation is surprisingly modern, and when you dig into the history and the science, you find something really interesting. For most of human history, people didn't sleep in a single 8-hour block. Roger E. Kirch, a historian at Virginia Tech, spent 16 years researching sleep patterns before the industrial era. He examined hundreds of historical documents, diaries, court records, medical texts, literature, anthropological accounts. and he found overwhelming evidence that pre-industrial humans practiced what he calls segmented sleep, or biphasic sleep. They slept in two distinct chunks. A first sleep that started shortly after dusk and lasted 3 to 4 hours, then a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night, lasting 1 to 2 hours, then a second sleep until dawn. During that middle of the night waking period, people did all sorts of things. They prayed. They reflected on dreams. They talked with their bed partners. They visited neighbors. They even conceived children. There are references to this in medieval medical texts that specifically recommend the period between first and second sleep as the ideal time for conception. This pattern appears across cultures. It appears in societies that had no contact with each other. It appears in historical records going back to ancient Greece and earlier. It was so universal that nobody even remarked on it as unusual. It was just how humans slept. Until artificial light changed everything. The invention and widespread adoption of artificial lighting, first candles and oil lamps becoming cheaper and more accessible, then gas lighting, then electric lighting, fundamentally altered human sleep patterns. Suddenly, the night wasn't dark anymore. You could stay awake, be productive, socialize, work. The boundary between day and night blurred, and the consolidated 8-hour sleep block emerged. Not because it was natural, not because it was optimal, but because industrial capitalism needed workers who were awake for a continuous 16-hour period and asleep for a continuous 8-hour period. It fit the factory schedule. Think about that for a second. The way you sleep, the pattern you've been told is normal and healthy, was shaped more by the needs of 19th century factory owners than by the needs of your biology. Let's keep going with sleep because this gets even more interesting. You know that thing where you wake up in the middle of the night, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning, and you lie there staring at the ceiling, unable to fall back asleep? And you panic. You think something's wrong with you. You check the clock. You calculate how many hours of sleep you're losing. The anxiety builds, which makes it even harder to fall back asleep. Sound familiar? Here's the thing. That middle of the night waking, it might not be insomnia at all. It might be your body trying to do what it was designed to do. Trying to revert to segmented sleep. Trying to give you that natural period of quiet wakefulness between first and second sleep. But because we've been told that normal sleep means falling asleep and staying asleep for 8 continuous hours, we interpret any waking as a problem. And the anxiety that creates actually does make it a problem. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Thomas Wehr, a psychiatrist at the National Institute of Mental Health, conducted a landmark experiment in the 1990s. He took a group of people and removed all artificial light from their environment. No lamps, no screens, no electric light of any kind. They lived in natural light conditions, with about 14 hours of darkness each night, similar to what a pre-industrial human would have experienced during winter months. At first, the participants just slept a lot. They were catching up on a massive sleep debt that most modern humans carry without realizing it. But after a few weeks, something remarkable happened. They naturally settled into a segmented sleep pattern. First sleep, waking period, second sleep. Exactly what Ekirch found in the historical records. And during that waking period, Wehr measured their brain chemistry. He found elevated levels of prolactin, the same hormone associated with the peaceful, contented feeling you get after orgasm, or the calm you feel during deep meditation. These people weren't just awake in the middle of the night. They were in a unique neurochemical state that modern humans essentially never experience. We may have eliminated an entire state of consciousness from our lives by changing how we sleep. Now, beyond the pattern of sleep, there's the issue of circadian rhythm disruption. And this one affects virtually every single person watching this. Your body runs on an internal clock. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, a tiny cluster of about 20,000 neurons in your hypothalamus, acts as your master clock. It coordinates the timing of hormone release, body temperature fluctuation, digestion, immune function, and dozens of other processes. This clock is primarily set by light. Specifically, by the presence or absence of blue spectrum light, which is the dominant wavelength in sunlight. When blue light hits receptors in your eyes, called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, they send a signal to your suprachiasmatic nucleus saying, "It's daytime." When blue light goes away, the clock shifts to nighttime mode. Melatonin production begins. Body temperature drops. The sleep process initiates. For hundreds of thousands of years, the only source of blue light was the sun. When the sun went down, blue light went away, and your body knew it was time to sleep. Then we invented screens. Your phone, your laptop, your tablet, your television. They all emit significant amounts of blue spectrum light. And when you look at these screens in the evening, you are essentially telling your suprachiasmatic nucleus that it's still daytime. Your brain suppresses melatonin production. Your body temperature stays elevated. Your sleep drive is pushed back. Research from Harvard Medical School and other institutions has shown that evening screen use can delay melatonin onset by up to 90 minutes and reduce total melatonin production by more than 50%. This doesn't just make it harder to fall asleep. It changes the architecture of the sleep you do get. Less deep sleep, less REM sleep, more time in lighter stages that aren't as restorative. And this is happening to almost everyone, every single night. But blue light from screens is only part of the problem. Indoor lighting in general disrupts circadian rhythms because we spend so much time inside. The average American spends about 93% of their time indoors. 93%. Our bodies were built for a world where we spend most of our time outside, in natural light, with clear, bright days and truly dark nights. Instead, we live in a perpetual twilight. Indoor lighting is too dim to give our circadian clocks a strong daytime signal, but too bright at night to allow a proper transition to darkness. We're confusing our internal clocks all day long, and the consequences go way beyond just feeling tired. Circadian rhythm disruption has been linked to increased risk of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, depression, and certain cancers. The World Health Organization has classified nighttime shift work as a probable carcinogen because of what it does to circadian rhythms. Your sleep isn't just something you do at night. It's the foundation of every other system in your body, and we've systematically, comprehensively broken it. Now let's move to a system that might be the most paradoxical evolutionary mismatch of all. Your immune system is incredible. Let's get that out of the way first. It's a staggeringly complex network of cells, proteins, organs, and chemical signals that work together to identify and destroy threats that could kill you. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, cancerous cells. Your immune system handles all of them, usually without you even knowing. It can distinguish between your own cells and foreign invaders. It can remember pathogens it encountered years ago and mount a faster response the second time around. It can adapt to entirely new threats it has never seen before. In terms of sheer biological sophistication, your immune system is right up there with your brain. So why does it make you sneeze when pollen exists? Why does it give you hives when you eat a shrimp? Why does it attack your own thyroid gland, or your own joints, or the lining of your own intestines? Why, in a world full of actually dangerous things, does your immune system so often lose its mind over things that are completely harmless? The answer, once again, is mismatch. But this one has a twist. It's not just that the world changed, it's that the world got too clean. This idea is often called the hygiene hypothesis, though the more accurate modern framing is the old friends hypothesis, proposed by Graham Rook, a professor of medical microbiology at University College London. Here's the basic concept. For the vast majority of human existence, we lived in constant contact with microorganisms. Not just pathogens that made us sick, but a vast ecosystem of bacteria, parasites, and other organisms that our immune systems learned to coexist with. Intestinal worms, or helminths, were nearly universal in human populations until very recently. Various species of bacteria lived on our skin, in our gut, in our respiratory tracts. We drank water that contained microorganisms. We ate food that was covered in soil bacteria. We lived in close contact with animals. We were, in a biological sense, never alone. We were always part of a complex ecosystem, and our immune systems evolved in the context of that ecosystem. Think of your immune system like a thermostat. It needs input to calibrate properly. Too cold, turn on the heat. Too hot, turn on the AC. But it needs accurate temperature readings to work correctly. The microorganisms we co-evolved with provided that calibration. They trained the immune system. They taught it what to react to, and, critically, what not to react to. They helped develop the regulatory pathways, the T regulatory cells, and other suppressive mechanisms that keep immune responses in check and prevent the system from attacking harmless targets or the body's own tissues. When you remove those organisms from the equation, which is exactly what modern sanitation, clean water, antibiotics, antimicrobial soaps, and urban living have done, the immune system loses its calibration input. It's a thermostat with no temperature reading, so it starts doing two things. First, it overreacts to harmless environmental substances. Pollen, dust mites, pet dander, certain foods. These things are not threats, they're not dangerous. But an undercalibrated immune system flags them as dangerous and mounts a full inflammatory response. That's an allergy. Second, it starts attacking the body's own tissues. Rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, lupus, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. These are all autoimmune conditions where the immune system has lost the ability to distinguish self from non-self and begins destroying healthy tissue. And the epidemiology is staggering. Autoimmune diseases have been increasing dramatically in developed countries for decades. Not in developing countries, where people still have higher parasite loads and more microbial exposure. In clean, sanitized, urban, developed countries. The pattern is unmistakable. Allergies follow the same pattern. Hay fever was essentially unknown before the Industrial Revolution. It was first described in the early 1800s and was initially considered a disease of the upper classes, people who lived the cleanest, most sheltered lives. Now it affects up to 30% of the population in developed nations. Let me be very clear about something. This is not an argument against hygiene. Sanitation has saved countless millions of lives. Clean water alone has probably prevented more deaths than any medical intervention in history. Antibiotics have pulled people back from the edge of death from infections that would have been a certain death sentence 100 years ago. We absolutely do not want to go back to a world without these things. But there is a cost, and the cost is that we've removed the microbial ecosystem that our immune systems needed for proper development and regulation. And we're paying for that with skyrocketing rates of allergic and autoimmune disease. Some researchers are actually exploring therapeutic approaches based on this understanding. Helminthic therapy, intentionally introducing certain species of parasitic worms into patients with autoimmune conditions, has shown promising results in some clinical trials. Fecal microbiota transplants, essentially resetting someone's gut bacterial ecosystem with material from a healthy donor, are being investigated for a range of conditions. These aren't fringe ideas. These are being studied at major research institutions worldwide. Because the evidence that our immune systems are suffering from a lack of the microbial input they evolved to expect is becoming very difficult to ignore. Now I want to shift to something different. Something visible. Something you're using right now to read these words or watch this video. Your eyes. Here's a number that should alarm you. In East Asian countries like South Korea, China, and Singapore, the rate of myopia, nearsightedness, among young adults has reached 80 to 90% in some urban populations. 90%. That is not a typo. Globally, myopia rates have been increasing at an extraordinary pace. Research published in the journal Ophthalmology projected that by 2050, roughly half of the world's population will be myopic. 5 billion people. Is this genetic? Are human eyes suddenly mutating? No, this is environmental. And the primary driver appears to be something deceptively simple. Not enough time outdoors. Research from multiple groups, including major studies in Australia, Taiwan, and China, has converged on a fascinating finding. The single biggest protective factor against myopia development in children isn't less screen time, though that matters. It's more time spent outside in natural daylight. The mechanism appears to be related to light intensity and dopamine release in the retina. Natural outdoor light is bright, much brighter than indoor light. Even on a cloudy day, Outdoor light intensity is typically 5 to 10 times greater than indoor lighting. This bright light stimulates dopamine release in the retina, and retinal dopamine appears to regulate eye growth during childhood and adolescence. When the eye grows, it gets longer from front to back. If it grows too long, the focal point shifts in front of the retina instead of landing on it. That's myopia. Things far away are blurry because the light is focusing in the wrong place. Outdoor light, through the dopamine mechanism, appears to slow this elongation and keep the eye growing to the right length. Without adequate outdoor light exposure, the eye tends to grow too long, and you end up nearsighted. Our ancestors spent most of their time outdoors, bright natural light all day. This wasn't something they had to think about. It just happened. The eye developed normally because the environmental input it needed was always present. Modern children spend most of their time indoors, schools, homes, activities, all under artificial lighting that's a fraction of the intensity of natural light, and their eyes are growing too long as a result. An intervention study in Taiwan actually tested this directly. They required school children to spend additional time outdoors during the school day, about 80 minutes per day. The result was a significant reduction in new myopia cases compared to control schools. Just going outside. That's it. Your eyes weren't designed for the indoors. They need natural light to develop properly. And most of us aren't getting nearly enough. But myopia is just one part of the story. Let's talk about what you're doing to your eyes right now. If you're reading this on a screen, your eyes are doing something they were never meant to do for extended periods. They're focused on a near object at a fixed distance for minutes or hours at a time. Your visual system evolved for a world where your focus was constantly shifting, scanning the horizon, tracking an animal, looking up at a tree, glancing at the ground. Near, far, all day long. Your eye muscles, the ciliary muscles that adjust the shape of your lens for different distances, were designed for constant variation. When you stare at a screen, those muscles lock into one position for hours. This is like holding a bicep curl without releasing it. Eventually, the muscle fatigues. It cramps. It has trouble relaxing. That's why your eyes feel strained after long screen sessions. That's why your distance vision can feel temporarily blurry after looking at a screen for a long time. Eye doctors call this digital eye strain or computer vision syndrome. It affects an estimated 60 to 90% of people who work on computers. Symptoms include eye fatigue, dryness, blurred vision, headaches, and neck pain. All right, let's shift to something that causes an enormous amount of frustration and confusion for millions of people. Weight management. Metabolism. The seemingly impossible task of losing weight and keeping it off. If you've ever tried to lose weight, you know the basic experience. You eat less, you move more, you lose some weight, maybe quite a bit at first, you feel great, you're motivated, and then it slows down. Then it stops. Then, despite still eating carefully, the weight starts creeping back. You try harder, you restrict more, you exercise more, and your body fights you every step of the way. This is not a failure of willpower. This is not a character flaw. This is your body doing exactly what millions of years of evolution programmed it to do. For virtually all of human existence, the primary threat to survival was not having enough food. Starvation was a constant, real, ever-present danger. Famine was common. Caloric scarcity was the default state. In that world, the ability to store energy efficiently and resist losing stored energy was a massive survival advantage. Your body evolved an incredibly sophisticated set of mechanisms to prevent starvation. And those mechanisms activate the moment your body detects that you're eating less than you need. When you reduce your caloric intake, your body doesn't just passively burn fat to make up the difference. It actively fights back. Here's what happens. Your metabolic rate drops, not just because you weigh less and therefore need fewer calories. Beyond that passive reduction, your body actively decreases its resting metabolic rate below what would be predicted by your new weight. This phenomenon is called adaptive thermogenesis, or metabolic adaptation. A landmark study, often called the Biggest Loser Study, published in the journal Obesity, followed contestants from the television show 6 years after the competition ended. The researchers, led by Kevin Hall at the National Institutes of Health, found that the contestants' metabolic rates were still significantly suppressed 6 years later. On average, they were burning about 500 fewer calories per day than would be expected for people of their size and composition. 500 calories per day. That's a huge deficit that their bodies were creating by running slower, burning less, conserving more. And this wasn't something they could overcome with willpower. This was happening at the cellular level, outside of conscious control. But metabolic slowdown is just one of the defensive mechanisms your body deploys. Your hunger hormones change. Leptin, the hormone that signals satiety, decreases. Ghrelin, the hormone that signals hunger, increases. So you feel hungrier than you did before you started dieting, even though you're consuming the same number of calories that used to feel like plenty. This isn't psychological hunger. This is biochemical hunger. Your body is chemically screaming at you to eat more. Your brain's reward response to food intensifies. After weight loss, brain imaging studies show that the reward centers of the brain respond more strongly to images of high-calorie food. Food literally looks more appealing to someone who has lost weight than to someone who hasn't. Your brain is trying to motivate you to seek out calorie-dense food because it thinks you're in danger. Your muscles become more efficient. After weight loss, your muscles use less energy to perform the same movements. This means exercise burns fewer calories than it did before. Your body is squeezing more work out of every calorie, because in its ancestral logic, calories might run out at any moment. All of these mechanisms stack on top of each other, and they can persist for years, possibly permanently, though the research on long-term duration is still evolving. This is why the vast majority of diets fail in the long run. The statistics are grim. Research consistently shows that most people who lose significant weight regain most or all of it within 5 years. Not because they're weak, not because they stopped trying, but because their bodies are deploying every tool in the evolutionary arsenal to get back to their previous weight. Your body has a set point, or more accurately, a set range, that it defends. It's like a thermostat for body weight. You can push it down temporarily, but the system keeps trying to push it back up. Because in the environment your body evolved for, regaining lost weight was the difference between surviving the next famine and dying. This connects to something even more fundamental. Your food preferences, your cravings, the foods that you find irresistibly appealing. Why do humans love sugar? Why do we crave fat? Why does a cheeseburger taste better than a salad? Why is it so easy to eat an entire bag of chips and so hard to eat an entire bag of broccoli? Because your taste preferences were calibrated in a world where these things were rare. Sugar, in the ancestral environment, meant ripe fruit. Fruit was seasonal, hard to find, and had to be eaten quickly before it rotted or another animal got it. Liking sugar was a survival advantage because it motivated you to seek out and consume fruit when it was available, giving you a burst of quick energy and essential vitamins. Fat was even more valuable. Fat is the most calorie-dense macronutrient, packing 9 calories per gram compared to 4 for carbohydrates and protein. In a world where calories were hard to come by, a preference for fat-rich foods was enormously advantageous. Finding a fatty cut of meat or a cache of nuts could provide enough energy to survive for days. Salt was essential for maintaining electrolyte balance, but was relatively scarce in most natural environments. A craving for salt ensured that you would seek it out and consume it when available. These preferences made perfect sense in a world of scarcity. They drove you toward the most nutritionally valuable foods in an environment where finding food at all was a daily challenge. But now you live in a world where sugar, fat, and salt are not scarce. They're everywhere. They're cheap. They're combined together in ways that never occur in nature. A donut, for example, combines sugar, fat, and refined carbohydrates in concentrations that no natural food comes close to matching. Your taste buds literally did not evolve for this combination. It overloads the reward circuits. Food scientists know this. The food industry employs thousands of researchers whose job is to engineer what they call the bliss point, the optimal combination of sugar, fat, salt, and texture that maximizes the pleasure response and keeps you eating. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is openly discussed in food science literature and has been documented in investigative books by journalists like Michael Moss. Your ancient food-seeking brain is being exploited by modern food engineering, and the result is an obesity epidemic that affects more than 650 million adults worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. We're not eating too much because we lack discipline. We're eating too much because we're running Stone Age software in a world of engineered, hyper-palatable food. Our bodies are doing exactly what they were designed to do. Find high-calorie food and eat as much of it as possible before it runs out. The problem is, it never runs out. Now, let's talk about something that connects several of the things we've discussed so far. Something that sits at the intersection of your brain, your immune system, your sleep patterns, and your metabolic health. Stress. Your stress response, the famous fight or flight system, is mediated primarily by two mechanisms: the sympathetic nervous system, which acts fast, and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, which acts slower but lasts longer. When your brain perceives a threat, the sympathetic nervous system fires almost instantly. Adrenaline floods your system. Heart rate increases. Blood pressure rises. Blood flow redirects from your digestive system to your muscles. Your pupils dilate. Your airways open. Non-essential functions like digestion, reproduction, and immune activity are temporarily suppressed. Everything is mobilized for immediate physical action. This is an extraordinary system. It can go from 0 to full activation in seconds. And for what it was designed for, brief encounters with physical threats, it works perfectly. You see a snake, you jump back. The danger passes, the system deactivates. Cortisol levels return to normal. Your body goes back to rest and digest mode. The whole event lasts maybe a few minutes, but modern stressors don't work like that. Modern stressors are chronic. They don't resolve in minutes. They persist for weeks, months, years. Financial stress, work stress, relationship stress, social media comparison, news cycle anxiety, health worries, housing insecurity, the grind of daily commuting, the pressure of constant availability via phone and email. None of these threats require physical action. You can't fight your mortgage. You can't run away from your inbox. But your stress response system doesn't know that. It activates the same way it would for a predator. And because the threat never goes away, it never fully deactivates. When the stress response stays activated chronically, the consequences ripple through every system in your body. Elevated cortisol over extended periods suppresses immune function. Not the acute, helpful suppression that happens during fight or flight, but a sustained weakening that makes you more vulnerable to infections and slows healing. This is why people who are chronically stressed get sick more often. It's not psychological, it's immunological. Chronic cortisol elevation promotes visceral fat storage, the dangerous fat that accumulates around your organs. It increases insulin resistance, a precursor to type 2 diabetes. It elevates blood pressure. It increases systemic inflammation, which is now understood to be a contributing factor in heart disease, cancer, and neurodegenerative diseases. Chronic stress literally shrinks parts of your brain. The hippocampus, crucial for memory formation, is particularly sensitive to cortisol. Brain imaging studies have shown measurable reductions in hippocampal volume in people with chronic stress and elevated cortisol. This is one pathway through which chronic stress impairs memory and cognitive function. Meanwhile, chronic stress enlarges the amygdala, the brain's fear center. So not only does chronic stress damage the part of your brain that helps you think clearly and form memories, it strengthens the part that makes you more reactive to threats. You become more anxious, more fearful, more stressed, which produces more cortisol, which does more damage, which makes you more stressed. It's a feedback loop, a vicious cycle that feeds itself, and your body was never designed to be in this state. The stress response was meant to be a sprint. Modern life has turned it into a marathon, and your body is breaking down because of it. Now, here's where something really interesting happens when we zoom out and look at all these systems together. Because you might be noticing a pattern. The brain, the spine, the teeth, sleep, the immune system, vision, metabolism, the stress response. They all tell the same story. Every single one of these systems was built for a specific environment, and every single one of them is malfunctioning because the environment changed faster than the body could adapt. This is the core concept that evolutionary biologists call evolutionary mismatch. And it might be the most important idea in modern health science. Daniel Lieberman, a professor of human evolutionary biology at Harvard, has written extensively about this. His argument, supported by decades of research, is that many of the most common chronic diseases of the modern world are not diseases at all in the traditional sense. They're mismatched diseases. They exist because our bodies are interacting with an environment they didn't evolve for. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, many cancers, osteoporosis, myopia, flat feet, impacted wisdom teeth, lower back pain, anxiety disorders, depression, insomnia, allergies, autoimmune conditions, obesity. All of these have environmental mismatch as a significant contributing factor. Not the only factor, genetics and individual variation matter too, but a major and often the primary factor. And the timeline of the mismatch is vanishingly short by evolutionary standards. Agriculture began roughly 12,000 years ago. Industrialization began roughly 250 years ago. The digital revolution began roughly 30 years ago. 12,000 years sounds like a long time. But in evolutionary terms, it's nothing. Significant genetic adaptation takes tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years for complex traits. 12,000 years is maybe 500 generations. Not nearly enough time for major biological redesign. So here you are, a body built over millions of years for a world of physical labor, natural light, seasonal eating, microbial exposure, and brief acute stressors. Living in a world of sedentary work, artificial light, constant food availability, sterile environments, and chronic psychological stress. And you wonder why you don't feel right. Let's talk about something that people rarely frame in terms of evolutionary compromise, but absolutely should. Reproduction. Specifically, let's talk about human childbirth. Because human childbirth is, from an engineering perspective, absurdly dangerous compared to virtually every other mammal on the planet. The reason comes down to two competing evolutionary pressures that directly conflict with each other. First, bipedalism. When we stood upright, the pelvis had to narrow. A wide pelvis would make bipedal walking and running mechanically inefficient. So, natural selection pushed the pelvis to be narrower and more compact, optimizing it for upright locomotion. Second, brain size. Human brains are enormous relative to our body size, and they grow rapidly during fetal development. A newborn human's head is proportionally huge compared to the birth canal. These two pressures pull in opposite directions. The pelvis wants to be narrow for walking. The baby's head needs it to be wide for birth. The result is what paleoanthropologists call the obstetric dilemma. Human babies are born through a birth canal that is barely, just barely big enough for their heads to pass through, and even barely is generous. The baby has to rotate during delivery. The head enters the pelvis facing one direction and must turn during passage because the birth canal isn't round. It's a twisted oval that changes orientation as it goes deeper. The baby essentially corkscrews through the mother's pelvis. No other primate does this. In most primates, the birth canal is spacious relative to the infant's head. Birth is relatively quick and uncomplicated. A chimpanzee can give birth alone in minutes. For humans, unassisted childbirth has historically been extremely dangerous. Before modern obstetric medicine, maternal mortality rates were staggering. In some historical European populations, the lifetime risk of dying from childbirth was as high as 1 in 8. 1 in 8 women dying as a direct result of giving birth. In developing nations without access to modern care, maternal mortality remains heartbreakingly high even today. And even with modern medicine, human childbirth is complicated enough to require extensive medical infrastructure. C-sections, which are major abdominal surgery, account for roughly 1/3 of all births in the United States and are medically necessary in a significant percentage of cases. All of this because evolution couldn't figure out how to give us both a big brain and a pelvis optimized for walking. It just split the difference and hoped for the best. And there's another compromise embedded in the obstetric dilemma. Human babies are born premature by primate standards. If human gestation followed the pattern of other primates scaled to our body and brain size, pregnancy would last about 18 to 21 months. At that point, the baby would be born at a developmental stage similar to a newborn chimpanzee, able to cling to its mother, somewhat mobile, relatively independent. But a baby that developed for 21 months would have a head too large to fit through the birth canal at all. So humans evolved to give birth earlier, at roughly 9 months, when the baby's head is just small enough to squeeze through. The consequence: human newborns are spectacularly helpless, more helpless than the newborns of almost any other mammal. They can't walk. They can't hold their heads up. They can't feed themselves. They can't regulate their own body temperature effectively. They require constant, round-the-clock care for months. This extended period of infantile helplessness is the direct cost of the obstetric dilemma. We pay for our big brains and our upright posture with the most dependent, vulnerable newborns in the mammalian kingdom. And this, in turn, drove the evolution of intensive cooperative child-rearing, long-term pair bonding, extended family involvement, and eventually, the complex social structures that define human societies. Our social nature isn't just a nice feature. It's a biological necessity, created by the compromises in our reproductive anatomy. Here's an evolutionary compromise so dangerous that it kills thousands of people every year. And it's happening in your throat, right now. Every time you eat, you have one tube for air and one tube for food. The trachea carries air to your lungs. The esophagus carries food to your stomach. And both of these tubes share the same entrance, the pharynx, the back of your throat. This means that every single time you swallow, your body has to precisely redirect the food or liquid away from your airway and into your esophagus. This is accomplished by a small flap of cartilage called the epiglottis, which folds down over the trachea during swallowing. And it works, most of the time, but not always. Choking is the 4th leading cause of unintentional injury death in the United States. In 2020 alone, more than 5,000 Americans died from choking on food. Among children under 5, it's one of the leading causes of death. And among elderly adults, choking becomes increasingly common as the muscles and reflexes involved in swallowing weaken with age. This is an insane design flaw. If you were engineering a body from scratch, you would never have the air tube and the food tube share an opening. You would separate them completely. Different openings, different pathways, no possibility of crossover. And here's the thing. Many other animals do have more separation between these pathways. In most mammals, the larynx sits higher in the throat, and the epiglottis can lock behind the soft palate, creating a more secure separation between the airway and the food pathway. This allows many animals to breathe and swallow simultaneously. Newborn human babies actually have this configuration too. For the first few months of life, a human infant's larynx is positioned high enough that they can breathe and nurse at the same time. That's why babies can suckle continuously without pausing to breathe. But as we develop, the larynx descends. It drops lower in the throat. And when it does, the neat separation between airway and food pathway is lost. The shared space in the pharynx gets bigger, and the risk of choking increases. Why would evolution do this? Why would the larynx descend and increase the risk of a fatal malfunction? Because of speech. The descended larynx creates a larger resonating chamber in the throat. This gives us the ability to produce the wide range of vowel sounds that characterize human speech. The pharyngeal space that makes choking possible is the same space that makes complex spoken language possible. So you can talk, but you might die eating a grape. That's the trade-off. That's the compromise. Speech versus not choking. Evolution chose speech. And it made every meal for the rest of human existence slightly dangerous as a result. This is such a perfect example of how evolution works. It doesn't optimize. It doesn't plan ahead. It doesn't weigh long-term consequences. It just selects for whatever provides the biggest immediate advantage. even if that advantage comes with a significant cost. Speech was such an enormous advantage for survival and reproduction that the increased risk of choking was, in evolutionary terms, an acceptable price. The individuals who could speak more effectively had better social coordination, better ability to share information, better success in mating. And so the genes for a descended larynx spread through the population, along with all the choking risk that came with them. Now let's zoom out even further, because I've been talking about individual body parts and systems, and I want to pull all of this together. Why do we age? Why do our bodies deteriorate? Why does everything start falling apart after about 30 or 40 years? This seems like it shouldn't happen. If your body can build itself from a single cell, if it can heal wounds, if it can replace damaged tissue, if it has all the DNA instructions for every protein and structure in your entire body, why can't it just keep maintaining itself indefinitely? The answer is that evolution doesn't care about you after you've reproduced. This is a harsh truth, but it's fundamental to understanding the biology of aging. Evolution selects for traits that help you survive and reproduce. Once you've passed on your genes, the selective pressure drops dramatically. Think about it this way. A gene that helps you survive to age 20 and have children will be strongly selected for. It will spread through the population rapidly. A gene that helps you stay healthy at age 70. There's much less selective pressure for that, because by 70, you've already reproduced. Your genes are already in the next generation. Whether you're healthy at 70 or not doesn't change how many copies of your genes exist. This principle, first articulated by Peter Medawar and later refined by George Williams in what's called the antagonistic pleiotropy hypothesis, explains a lot about aging. Antagonistic pleiotropy means that a single gene can have multiple effects, and those effects can be beneficial early in life and harmful later in life. Evolution will select for genes that provide early life benefits, even if those same genes cause late life damage, because the early life benefits contribute to reproductive success, and the late life damage occurs after reproduction has already happened. Here's a concrete example. Testosterone. High testosterone levels in young men promote muscle growth, bone density, competitive drive, and mate-seeking behavior. All of these are advantageous for reproductive success. But chronically elevated testosterone is also associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, prostate enlargement, and certain cancers later in life. Evolution doesn't care about the later in life costs because by the time they show up, the genes have already been passed on. Another example, the inflammation response. Strong, vigorous inflammatory responses are crucial for fighting infection in youth. They keep you alive when you encounter pathogens. But chronic low-grade inflammation in later life, often called inflammaging, contributes to heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and neurodegeneration. Same genes. Beneficial early, harmful late. Evolution selected for them because early benefits drive reproductive success. This is why aging feels like everything breaks at once. It's not one system failing. It's dozens of systems, each one optimized for early performance at the expense of late durability, all starting to accumulate damage around the same time. Your DNA repair mechanisms become less efficient. Telomeres shorten, stem cell populations decline, mitochondria become less effective. Protein quality control deteriorates, cellular senescence accumulates, chronic inflammation increases. None of these are random. They're all the late life costs of early life optimizations. They're the bill coming due for the biological compromises that kept your ancestors alive long enough to have kids. And here's the thing. For most of human history, this wasn't really a problem. Average life expectancy for most of our evolutionary past was somewhere in the range of 30 to 40 years. Not because people couldn't live longer. They could, and some did, but because infectious disease, injury, violence, and famine killed most people before the late life costs of antagonistic pleiotropy kicked in. Now, thanks to modern medicine, sanitation, and nutrition, most people in developed countries live into their 70s, 80s, and beyond. We've outrun the diseases that used to kill us young. But we've run straight into the diseases of aging that evolution never bothered to protect us from because we were never supposed to live this long. Cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, osteoporosis, arthritis. These are, in large part, the consequences of bodies that were designed to last 40 years being asked to last 80. Let's talk about loneliness. Because loneliness might be the most dangerous evolutionary mismatch of all. Humans are social animals. Profoundly, fundamentally social. This isn't a personality trait. It's not some people being extroverts and some people being introverts. At the biological level, every human brain is built for social connection. It's as fundamental to our design as the need for food or water. And I'm not being poetic. Neuroscience research has shown that social isolation activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Literally the same neural pathways. When you feel lonely, your brain processes it using the same systems it uses when you stub your toe or burn your hand. Why? Because in the ancestral environment, being alone was genuinely, physically dangerous. Humans survived in groups. We hunted in groups. We defended against predators in groups. We raised children in groups. An isolated human in the savanna was a dead human. It was only a matter of time. So evolution built a powerful motivational system to keep us connected. Loneliness is the social equivalent of hunger. Hunger motivates you to seek food. Loneliness motivates you to seek social connection. Both are alarm signals telling you that a survival need is unmet. And just like chronic hunger destroys your body, chronic loneliness destroys your body too. Research by Julianne Holt-Lunstad at Brigham Young University has shown that chronic loneliness and social isolation increase the risk of premature death by 26%. That's comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's more dangerous than obesity, more dangerous than physical inactivity. The mechanisms are biological. Chronic loneliness triggers the stress response. Cortisol goes up, inflammation increases, immune function is altered, blood pressure rises, sleep quality deteriorates. The same cascading physiological damage we discussed with chronic stress. And loneliness is epidemic right now. Surveys consistently show rising rates of loneliness across developed nations. The United States Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health epidemic in 2023. Young adults report some of the highest rates of loneliness ever measured. This is staggering when you think about it. We are more connected than at any point in human history in terms of technology. We can communicate with anyone, anywhere, instantly. We have social media platforms with billions of users. We have more ways to connect than our ancestors could have imagined. And yet people feel more alone than ever. Because the connections our brain evolved for aren't digital connections. They're physical, they're face-to-face, they involve touch, eye contact, shared physical space, synchronized movement, vocal tone, facial expressions, the full richness of in-person human interaction. A text message doesn't satisfy the neural circuits that evolved for sitting around a fire with your tribe. A like on Instagram doesn't satisfy the circuits that evolved for being held by someone who cares about you. A Zoom call doesn't satisfy the circuits that evolved for being physically present with other humans, breathing the same air, occupying the same space. Social media might actually be making loneliness worse. Research suggests that passive social media use, scrolling through other people's curated highlight reels, is associated with increased feelings of loneliness and decreased well-being. You're seeing the illusion of connection without the substance. And the comparison effect, seeing everyone else apparently living their best life, triggers feelings of inadequacy and isolation. Your brain evolved for a band of about 150 people. People you knew intimately. People you lived with. People you depended on. People who depended on you. Deep, reciprocal, physical relationships built over years of shared experience. What it got instead is 1,000 shallow digital connections and an apartment you come home to alone. Here's something almost nobody thinks about. You're probably breathing wrong right now. Not wrong in the sense that you're about to suffocate. Obviously, your autonomic nervous system handles the basics. But wrong in the sense that the way modern humans habitually breathe is fundamentally different from how we evolved to breathe, and it's affecting your health in ways you wouldn't expect. Humans are supposed to breathe through their noses. Obligate nasal breathers by design. Your nose isn't just a hole in your face, It's an incredibly sophisticated air processing system. When you breathe through your nose, the air passes through turbinates, complex bony structures lined with mucous membrane that warm, humidify, and filter the air before it reaches your lungs. Your nose removes about 75% of particulate matter from the air you breathe. It adds moisture to prevent your airways from drying out. It warms the air to body temperature, so it doesn't shock your lung tissue. But that's not all. Nasal breathing produces nitric oxide in the paranasal sinuses. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. It opens blood vessels in the lungs, improving oxygen transfer from the air into your bloodstream. Studies have shown that nasal breathing can increase blood oxygen levels by 10 to 15% compared to mouth breathing. Nasal breathing also naturally slows your breathing rate, which engages the parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest system. It literally calms you down. The resistance of the nasal passages creates a slight back pressure that helps maintain lung volume and improves oxygen exchange. Mouth breathing does none of this. Air comes in raw, unfiltered, unhumidified, without nitric oxide enhancement. Breathing rate tends to be faster. The sympathetic nervous system stays more active. You're in a subtle but chronic state of heightened stress. And here's the alarming part. A significant percentage of modern humans are habitual mouth breathers. Estimates vary, but some studies suggest that up to 50% of children and a similar proportion of adults breathe primarily through their mouths, especially during sleep. Why? Multiple factors. Chronic nasal congestion from allergies, which we already discussed, are an evolutionary mismatch. Enlarged adenoids and tonsils, which are more common in environments with higher airborne irritants. Craniofacial changes from soft diets, the same jaw-shrinking phenomenon we discussed with teeth, also affects the nasal passages because the upper jaw forms the floor of the nasal cavity. A smaller upper jaw means smaller nasal passages, which means more resistance to nasal airflow, which means more mouth breathing. It all connects. The same dietary shift that shrunk your jaw and crowded your teeth also narrowed your nasal passages and pushed you toward mouth breathing. One change cascading through multiple systems. James Nestor, a journalist who spent years investigating human breathing and wrote the book Breath, participated in a study at Stanford in which he breathed only through his mouth for 10 days, then switched to nasal-only breathing for 10 days. The results were dramatic. During the mouth breathing phase, his blood pressure increased. His heart rate variability decreased. His sleep quality deteriorated. His snoring increased dramatically, and he developed sleep apnea symptoms. All of this reversed during the nasal breathing phase. This wasn't a controlled clinical trial, and Nestor is the first to acknowledge its limitations. But the directional findings are consistent with a large body of research on the physiological differences between nasal and oral breathing. And here's one more connection that ties back to our earlier discussion of jaw development. Long-term mouth breathing in children affects facial development. Because the tongue should rest against the roof of the mouth, and the pressure of the tongue helps shape the upper jaw as it grows. When a child mouth breathes, the tongue drops to the floor of the mouth. The upper jaw doesn't get the expansive pressure it needs. It grows narrow and V-shaped instead of broad and U-shaped. This further crowding the teeth, further narrowing the nasal passages, and creating a self-reinforcing cycle of mouth breathing and poor craniofacial development. Let's go inside. Way inside, to your gut. You have about 38 trillion bacteria living in your digestive tract. That's roughly one bacterial cell for every human cell in your body. By some calculations, there are actually more bacterial cells in you than human cells. You are, in a very real sense, a cooperative colony of human and microbial life. This community of gut microorganisms, collectively called the gut microbiome, isn't just passively hanging out in your intestines. It's actively involved in your health in ways that scientists are only beginning to fully understand. Your gut bacteria help digest food that your own enzymes can't break down, particularly complex carbohydrates and fiber. They produce essential vitamins, including vitamin K and several B vitamins. They train your immune system, which is directly relevant to the immune mismatch we discussed earlier. About 70% of your immune system is concentrated in and around your gut, in constant dialogue with your microbial inhabitants. But here's where it gets really wild. Your gut communicates directly with your brain. The gut-brain axis is a bidirectional communication highway connecting your enteric nervous system, the nervous system of your gut, with your central nervous system. This communication happens through multiple channels. The vagus nerve, which runs from your brainstem to your abdomen. Immune signaling molecules, hormones, and metabolites produced by gut bacteria. Your gut produces about 95% of your body's serotonin. Serotonin, the neurotransmitter most associated with mood regulation, the molecule that most antidepressant medications target. 95% of it is made in your gut, not your brain. Your gut bacteria also produce dopamine, GABA, norepinephrine, and other neurotransmitters. They produce short-chain fatty acids that cross the blood-brain barrier and affect brain function. They influence the hypothalamic pituitary-adrenal axis, the stress response system we discussed earlier. Animal studies have been particularly striking. Germ-free mice, raised in sterile environments with no gut bacteria, show altered brain development, abnormal stress responses, and behaviors consistent with anxiety and depression. When you transplant gut bacteria from a bold, exploratory mouse strain into a timid strain, the timid mice become bolder, and vice versa. Human research is catching up. Studies have found correlations between gut microbiome composition and depression, anxiety, autism spectrum conditions, and even personality traits. The research is still in relatively early stages, and correlation isn't causation, but the signal is strong enough that major research institutions worldwide are investing heavily in understanding the gut-brain connection. Now, what does this have to do with evolutionary mismatch? Everything. Your gut microbiome is shaped by what you eat, where you live, what you're exposed to, and how you were born. When babies are born naturally, they get their first dose of good bacteria from their mom's body, which helps kickstart their gut health. Plus, breastfeeding is pretty amazing because it offers special nutrients that nourish those friendly bacteria. And let's not forget about all the fun stuff, playing in the dirt, hanging out with pets, and being around other people. That really helps mix things up and adds even more variety to their microbiome. Modern life disrupts every single one of these pathways. C-section births bypass vaginal microbial transfer. Formula feeding doesn't provide the same prebiotic oligosaccharides. Antibiotic use, while life-saving, devastates gut microbial communities. Antimicrobial soaps and sanitizers reduce environmental microbial exposure. Processed food lacks the fiber diversity that feeds a healthy microbiome. Urban living separates us from soil and animal microbiota. The result is that modern humans in developed countries have significantly less diverse gut microbiomes than traditional hunter-gatherer populations. Studies comparing the gut bacteria of groups like the Hadza people of Tanzania with urban Americans find that the Hadza have roughly 40% more microbial diversity. This loss of microbial diversity may be contributing to the rise in not just digestive disorders like irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease, but also to metabolic disorders, mood disorders, autoimmune diseases, and even neurodevelopmental conditions. You're not just losing bacteria. You're losing ancient evolutionary partners. Organisms that co-evolved with humans over hundreds of thousands of years, performing functions that your body came to depend on, and we're only just beginning to understand what we've lost. I want to come back to something we touched on earlier and go deeper. Circadian rhythms. Because the more you understand about circadian biology, the more you realize how fundamental this mismatch is. Your circadian clock isn't just about sleep, it's about everything. Every cell in your body has its own clock. Not just the master clock in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Every cell. Your liver cells have circadian rhythms. Your heart cells, your immune cells, your fat cells, your muscle cells, your gut cells. All of them oscillate on roughly 24-hour cycles, coordinated by the master clock, but also responsive to local signals. Gene expression follows circadian patterns. At different times of day, different genes are turned on and off. Some estimates suggest that up to 40% of all protein-coding genes show circadian variation in expression in at least one tissue type. 40%. Your body is a fundamentally different biochemical machine at midnight than it is at noon. Hormone release is circadian. Cortisol peaks in the early morning and drops at night. Melatonin rises at night and falls during the day. Growth hormone is released primarily during deep sleep. Testosterone peaks in the early morning. Insulin sensitivity varies throughout the day, peaking in the morning and declining at night. This last point has interesting implications. Your body is literally better at processing carbohydrates in the morning than at night. Eating the same meal at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. produces different metabolic responses. Evening eating leads to higher blood glucose levels and greater insulin secretion. This isn't because the food is different. It's because your metabolic machinery runs on a clock, and at night it's winding down. Body temperature follows a circadian curve. Core temperature drops in the late evening, reaching its lowest point around 4 to 5 a.m., then climbs during the day. This temperature drop is a critical trigger for sleep onset. It's why a cool bedroom helps you fall asleep. Immune function is circadian. Your immune system is more active during the night. This is why fevers tend to spike in the evening. It's why many symptoms of illness feel worse at night. Your body ramps up immune activity during rest because the immune response is energetically expensive and can cause collateral tissue damage. Better to do it when you're lying still than when you're running from a predator. Even your cardiovascular system follows circadian patterns. Blood pressure dips during sleep and surges in the early morning. Heart attacks are most common in the morning hours. This isn't coincidence. It's circadian biology. All of these finely tuned rhythms depend on consistent, reliable environmental time cues. And the most powerful time cue is the light-dark cycle. For millions of years, this cycle was absolute. Bright days, dark nights, no exceptions. Now think about what we've done. We've obliterated the light-dark cycle. We have bright lights at night. We have dim interiors during the day. We eat at all hours. We exercise at random times. We travel across time zones. We work night shifts. We look at screens that simulate daylight at midnight. Every single one of these things sends a conflicting signal to your circadian system. Your master clock is getting one signal. Your peripheral clocks are getting different signals. The coordination breaks down. The rhythms desynchronize. This state, called circadian disruption or circadian misalignment, is increasingly recognized as a major contributor to chronic disease. A comprehensive review published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences linked circadian disruption to obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, mood disorders, cognitive impairment, and accelerated aging. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, part of the WHO, has classified circadian disruption through shift work as probably carcinogenic to humans. Not possibly, probably, based on evidence from both human epidemiological studies and animal experiments. This isn't about getting a good night's sleep, though that matters. This is about living in alignment with a biological timing system that governs virtually every aspect of your physiology. And we are systematically, comprehensively out of alignment. So here we are. We've walked through the entire body. Brain, spine, knees, feet, teeth, eyes, immune system, sleep, metabolism, stress response, reproductive system, throat, lungs, gut, circadian rhythms, aging itself. And every single one tells the same story. Your body is not broken. Your body is not flawed. Your body is not defective. Your body is ancient. It's running programs that were written over millions of years, tested in the harshest conditions imaginable, refined by the most relentless optimization process in nature. Survival of the fittest. The problem is not the body. The problem is the world. You are living in an environment that your body has no evolutionary preparation for. Everything from the food you eat, to the light you see, to the air you breathe, to the way you move, or don't move, to the way you socialize, or don't socialize, to the way you sleep, or don't sleep, all of it is radically different from the conditions your body was built to thrive in. And the gap between what your body expects and what it gets is the source of an enormous amount of modern suffering. This doesn't mean you should try to live like a caveman. You can't. And you wouldn't want to. The ancestral world was brutal in its own ways. Infant mortality was high. Infectious disease was rampant. Violence was common. Life was physically grueling and often short. Modern civilization has solved many of those problems, and we should be grateful for that. Clean water, antibiotics, surgery, vaccines, central heating, abundant food. These are genuine miracles of human ingenuity. But the solution created new problems. Problems of mismatch, problems of excess, problems of deficiency in things we didn't even realize we needed because they were always there before. We solved starvation and created obesity. We solved infectious disease and created autoimmune disease. We solved darkness and created circadian disruption. We solved isolation through technology and created a loneliness epidemic. We solved physical danger and created chronic psychological stress. Every solution generated a new mismatch, and our bodies are absorbing the cost. So what do you do with this information? You don't have to overhaul your entire life. You don't have to move to the woods or start eating raw meat or throw away your phone. But understanding the mismatch gives you something powerful, a framework for making better choices. When you understand that your brain's anxiety response is an ancient alarm system misfiring in a safe world, you can learn to recognize it for what it is and respond differently. You can practice recognizing the false alarms. You can train your nervous system to down-regulate through breathing techniques, meditation, or simply naming the response for what it is. When you understand that your spine isn't designed for sitting, you can build more movement into your day. Not because some fitness influencer told you to, but because your body structurally needs it. Standing desks, walking meetings, regular position changes, strength training for the muscles that support your spine. These aren't luxuries. They're maintenance for a body that was built to move. When you understand that your jaw needs mechanical stimulus, you can make different choices about food texture. Chewing more. Incorporating harder foods. Being mindful of this for children during their developmental years. When you understand that your sleep system is being disrupted by light, you can manage your light environment. Bright light in the morning, dim light in the evening, blue light filters on screens, a dark bedroom. These simple changes can have profound effects on sleep quality. When you understand that your immune system needs microbial input, you can spend more time outdoors. Get your hands dirty in a garden. Don't sanitize everything obsessively. Let kids play in the dirt. Consider the microbial implications of dietary choices and antibiotic use. When you understand that your metabolism is designed to resist weight loss, you can approach weight management with more compassion and realism. Stop blaming yourself for biological responses that are outside your conscious control. Work with your body instead of against it. When you understand that your brain needs real social connection, not just digital approximations, you can prioritize face-to-face relationships, even when it's inconvenient, even when texting would be easier. When you understand that your eyes need natural light, you can go outside more. Take meetings outside. Walk during your lunch break. Make outdoor time a non-negotiable part of your day. None of these are revolutionary ideas, but framing them through the lens of evolutionary mismatch gives them urgency and context. You're not doing these things because a wellness blogger said so. You're doing them because your body literally requires these inputs to function properly, and the modern world doesn't provide them by default. You have to be intentional about bridging the gap between the world your body expects and the world you actually live in. Because here's the truth. You're not going to change the modern world. It's going to keep getting more artificial, more digital, more processed, more sedentary, more isolated, more overstimulating. That trajectory is clear, but you can change your relationship to it. You can create small pockets of alignment in your life. Moments where your ancient body gets what it actually needs. More natural light, more movement, more real food, more real connection, more dark, more quiet, more nature, more rest. Not because it's trendy, because it's biology. Your body is not broken. It's just homesick. It's homesick for a world that doesn't exist anymore. And the best thing you can do, the most radical act of self-care available to you, is to give it little pieces of that world back. One choice at a time.